Monday, November 8th, 1971. Interview number 4.
The electric system, when I came into the picture, had two 1,000 kilowatt turbo generators and I believe 6 fire tube boilers, which were very, of course, inefficient. They were hand-fired, not stoker fire, but hand-fired boilers. And as I always said, we shoved the coal in one door and pulled the ashes out the same door, about that. But the plant was tending to grow. There was a demand for electricity, which was common all over the country following that war. But we were not equipped to do it. So I believe the $250,000 was appropriated for that purpose. We bought a 2,000 kilowatt capacity turbo generator and put in 2 boilers, water tube Edgemore boilers. I'm remembering now, a long time ago. Edgemore boilers, and they Edgemore Company. And of course, that was, to my mind, a terrific step. That was doubling our capacity and didn't know we were going to get the customers. Well, we got them installed and got them in operation, and we, of course, didn't have the load. So one of the jobs I took on myself was to go out and find customers, which was not too easy to find among the industry because they were pretty much tied in with the private interest, which at the time was the Broadheads. They owned the other competing utility. So, but we succeeded in building up the load, and it wasn't long before we were calling for more money to put in another unit. The next unit was a 5,000 kilowatt unit. I merely mentioned these to just show the immediate growth.
Yes.
That all took place early in the game. But we had the unusual situation of competition from a private group, which was the Broadheads, who owned a power plant located down at the boat landing, which is now Hellman's salvage plant down there. Now the Broadheads themselves were not too bad to operate with. They needed the power, of course, for the streetcar lines, but they sold out to the Niagara, Lockport, and Ontario Power Company, which was the Niagara group. Of course, they were pretty fast boys.
Well, excuse me, would this be about 1922 or before that?
I think it's later than that.
That they sold out?
Is it later than
I'll
that?
have to find
The dates, I'm not...
That's all right.
I didn't look up the
But
dates.
it was after you came to work that they sold to the outside industry.
Yeah, they sold the outside industry. And I recall so well the feeling that I had as a young man. The Niagara Lockport people came into town, and of course they were the big boys from New York, from Buffalo, and of course had a lot of money to do business with, and they entertained most of the businessmen in town at the Sandals Hotel. I wasn't invited to the dinner, but I was told about it, and of course they told about all the wonderful things they're going to do for Jamestown, and of course all the wonderful things that were going to happen and so forth. Well, that of course irritated me naturally because they were tough competitors. But from then on, of course, the competition got pretty keen. It was really dog eat dog. And under the arrangement for connecting up houses, there was a little building boom at the time. The underwriters would inspect the wiring, and of course they would mail a permit to the Niagara and a permit to us. We set up an arrangement with a box at the post office where we would receive our mail, and our man would go to the post office early in the morning before most people were out of bed and pick up our permits. So we had a man with a rig go around and hang our service wires on every house that we had a permit for, although we had no idea what company they wanted. Well, once on, there wasn't too much complaint on the part of the people. They didn't want to get into the argument. Well, of course, we had some pretty hot arguments with the Niagara people. They claimed it was their customers and so forth. And there were many little episodes that one thing led to another, and of course, I don't know, we began to make money, and we were getting along just beautifully, and so we decided we'd better start reducing our rates, which of course we did. And of course, after, I believe, a couple of such reductions, the Niagara decided they couldn't take it any longer, and they wanted to fight. So they went to Public Service Commission and brought an action against us to try to stop us. And I'll have to tell you something here that I can't give it to you on just the time when it happened, but I'll tell you something here, and you can use it any way you wish, but it's probably telling tales out of school in a way. But the Niagara had gotten kind of rough. They had a fellow in there, I hate to mention names, but I'll probably have to, they didn't have to leave them. They had a man in their operating, a fellow by the name of Zimmerman, which was a very capable fellow, and of course he probably was sending with the idea that clean us up. Well, he ran up against a bunch of tough Swedes, I'll tell you that. So, but anyway, they were watching every move we made, and of course we were naturally watching them. And finally, Franklin Anderson sent me down to Albany to make an analysis of all the rates in all the territories where they were doing business, and I think there were 149. And I made copies of all those rates, and I brought them back, and we put them up in a little booklet. And on the top page of every sheet, we had the first 50 kilowatt hours Jamestown, 5 cents a kilowatt hour. That was the rate, the beginning rate of the block. And then, of course, we would take like Buffalo, Niagara Falls, and all the little towns, 149 of them. We had them all set up in this little booklet, little pamphlet. Well, that was kept very, very secret. It wasn't let out to anybody. So we had a bunch of them made up. And Franklin Anderson hadn't gone to his office down at the Empire Case Goods. So one day he called me down, he called Mr. Zimmerman down, and Mr. Zimmerman came in, I remember so well, thinking, of course, well, now I've got this thing under control. See, well, Franco was a pretty smooth operator. And he proceeded to work Mr. Zimmerman into a sort of a corner, since the naturally, and Zimmerman, I suppose, felt he was getting on fine, and so finally Franco Anderson said, well, how would you like to have 149 rate cases just right out of the clear? Of course, first it didn't mean anything to Zimmerman, but finally Franco said, hand me one of those little pamphlets. So I handed him one. They were down there on the floor. And he started reading from them, page by page. And of course, Zimmerman wanted one. Well, Franco said, oh, no. He says, they're ours. We don't intend to use them unless you make us use them. But if we should mail these to certain people in all these communities, you know what will happen. Well, the result of the whole thing was, of course, that we agreed, Mr. Anderson agreed, to destroy the books there and then, and that Niagara would, be a little bit more careful in their operation, because they had been pretty rough with the city.
Well, now, in what way? Can you be specific?
Yeah, for instance, they came in with 25 cycle power. And then they went around and they offered that to industry.
And that's more than you could produce.
We're only 60 cycles, see? We only have 60. 25, of course, was an outmoded cycle at the time. And normally it passed out during the Second War. But normally you wouldn't ask people, but that meant that they had to change the motors. So they went in and they changed the motors in some of the factories in town and took customers from us because they claimed it was cheaper power. And it was, because it was the generating cycle at the time. Then they made the big mistake of coming in with 62 and a half cycles, which of course you could not operate your telephone clocks, because there's only 60 seconds in a minute. And they came in with 62 and a half, which of course made it worse. But anyway, the 25 cycle business had hurt us.
That is, it could be sold cheaper.
Yes.
And so some companies that want to be economized would buy there.
Yeah, and it even got into my father-in-law's factory. They offered it down there. Then, of course, also, they did a tremendous amount of advertising, which, of course, we probably could not do, see. Also, they could offer certain things as specials, which we could not do. As an illustration, one comes to my mind at the moment. If you hook into a Niagara Power, why to be specific more than that, a city employee had signed up for Niagara Power, and I knew him, and of course I went to him and complained. So he said, they told him that if he would put in Niagara Power, that they would pay some amount, $50, $60, whatever it was, for the cost of the service connecting into the house, you see. Well, of course, we couldn't do that. So I took fire. I couldn't see that was all honest. And I remember going into the city council meeting one time. All the council didn't bother too much, but there was a series of these little episodes that come up, and we got to the attention of the councilmen. Of course, they wanted to work me over a little bit, and I was into a meeting there one night. I don't know if you know Larry Howard. He's still there. He was on the city council. And so this particular situation came up. So I explained to him. I said, well, now, what the Niagara offered, which was a contribution, see, which I don't think the rate could support. And of course we couldn't do it, so I took the position that we couldn't spend money. So I asked the council, I said, what would you say to the Larry Howard School Company? He said, well, he says, if you paid it, it would be graft. But he says, when I would paid it, it'd be good business. And of course that was the situation. Now many of those little things developed sort of, the feeling ran pretty high. And of course the upshot of the whole thing was, to bring the story to a conclusion, was that the day came when they had had enough. Now I can tell you, it's probably in that story that you got out of the paper that I wrote up one time. I sort of looked quickly for my notes that I wrote, and all that, the paper of course didn't have all of it. I thought
it didn't.
If I could find my notes, I could give them to you to give it to one. But let me tell you, just quickly, of course, as I don't know, but I had no idea, of course, that the Niagara were weakening to the point that they had. To me, the battle was still on. I didn't even know there was any...
Times were getting desperate for them.
That there was no any consideration for peace at all. To me, it was a battle. And first, I say I was young and didn't know any better. It was pretty rough, I guess, on some of them. And one little guy in particular was pretty mean. And of course, he was always going to take it out on me, but the poor fellow, he got killed many years ago. But anyway, one day, Carl Peterson then was chairman of the board. Frank Anderson, of course, had retired, and Carl Peterson was chairman of the board. And he told me that I should go down to New York to Mr. Maltby, Chairman Maltby, Chairman of the Public Service Commission, that they wanted to talk to me. So I took Fred Clary, who was a partner in Russell Rogerson's office. Now, Fred has died many years ago. So Fred and I, we went down to New York and went to the office of Maltby, Chairman of the Public Service Commission, not knowing what they were going to ask us or what they were going to talk to us about. And so Mr. Maltby asked if we wanted to sell the light plant. Well, to me, that was fighting words, as it is today, out of light and a drop of a hat. So I assured him, of course, that we had no intention of selling it at all. That was absolutely out of the
You were authorized by Mr. Peterson to make statements.
Well, I don't know that's what they were going to say.
No,
I didn't know that.
You had the authority.
Yeah, well, we just took it. But anyway, Clary, our attorney, was with us. And so Maltby, in the conversation, wanted to know if we'd be interested in buying. How much money did we have? Well, we assured him we had money in the bank, and we did.
Because the company was making a profit, or whatever you want to call it.
We were making money. And under the charter, of course, you're not really supposed to make money, but you can set up a reserve fund for certain things, because we had to, the biggest danger in any utility is obsolescence. If you don't buy the new things that will make it cheaper, you're through. You can't still run a plant with a reciprocating engine. You've got to have the newer things, see? So you've got to have the cash to do it, but you can't always go out and get it from the people on bonds. So we were putting money aside, and I'll come to that, what happened there when the election. But anyway, the upshot of that conversation was that Mr. Maltby expressed the opinion, as I recall, that perhaps an arrangement could be made whereby we could buy out the Niagara, which to me, of course, was unheard of. I just couldn't believe such a thing.
You hadn't thought of it? No one in the...
No, I never had any idea that they were going to do any more than fight. They'd come in and spend money. So, now you only recall that we had poles down on one side of the street, and they had poles
I
down.
was going to ask you about the arrangement. They had their own distribution system, and you had your own.
Yeah, and we would serve customers, and of course, if they got mad at us, they'd switch to the Niagara. If they get mad at Niagara, they switch to us.
People did switch back and forth.
Oh, yes. If they didn't want to pay the bills and complaints, they would switch from one to the other. And it was a wild thing. But at the same time, you want to remember, we had 4 sets of poles in operation in the City of Jamestown. We had 2 telephone companies, the Jamestown system, Jamestown Telephone Company, and the Bell Telephone Company. And then we had the City of Niagara, the city, and then we had the Niagara. Also, on certain streets, we had the Postal Telegraph Service and the Western Union Telegraph Service.
All separate poles.
All
Nobody...
they gradually got together and would use each other's poles. We got into some great arguments with the telephone company, Robert Jackson, over using our poles and we using their poles, and they included in their rates and so forth and so on. That's another story. But anyway, I came home all excited that the Niagara, of course, had come to conclusions they're going to give up.
And Mr. Maltby had got the word from Niagara that they were about.
Matter of fact,
the end.
this thing had been working around the circle, unknown to me. Robert H. Jackson, this liberal Democratic lawyer, which represented all the power, all the big capital interest in this community.
Oh, he did. Whenever there was a case, he
yes,
took the private company.
He had represented the telephone company, represented the Niagara Power Company, and he represented the broadened interest in all these fellows. And of course, he was a good opportunist, of course. Yeah, but an operator. I would like him. I had a lot of fun with him. Working me
Good
over
personality, though.
Oh, yeah,
I like
smart.
him.
Smart. He worked me over on several cases. And we went, I used to know him pretty well in Washington. We were in Washington. We went to the first trip we ever made to the White House. We made with him, his wife and my wife. But anyway, I came back, and of course, I found out that the Niagara had already, through Mr. Jackson, had been to Carl Peterson and had sort of mentioned this thing, that it probably could be worked out, you see. And so Mr. Peterson, when he told me to go down, knew, but didn't care to tell me what was going to happen. See, of course, not knowing probably what would happen. But anyway, that was the beginning of a long series of negotiations, and it was always funny to me because they brought in a fellow by the name of Harold Waldron, who was a very nice fellow. That's the line he did, and he was a friendly sort of a fellow to work with. And he knew, of course, that they were selling to the city, but we had to come to a price. And I think the price we finally agreed upon was $750,000. And we had 5 years to pay him. And we paid, I think, $300,000 down, if I'm not mistaken. $300,000 down. We paid the balance in 5 years. But anyway, during the negotiations, the arrangement was that I was not to show my face in any of the dealings. And that was the Niagara then were located in the building on the corner where the savings and loan is located now. That was their offices. And there was a back stairs we could go in. So whenever I had to go into the Niagara office for something, which was very seldom, I always had to go up and down in the back way so that they would not, people wouldn't see me going into the Niagara because they knew that we were arch enemies. Well, anyway, this thing worked itself down to the point where we wanted to, we agreed to close, got the price set, and close the deal. And then the question of notifying the council and the mayor and so forth. And at that time, of course, very little was said to the mayor.
I was going to say, wasn't the mayor on the board? Isn't he on?
Yes, he's a member of the board. Yes,
he
would be, the mayor would be automatically the president of the board. But being political, of course, the operating group concluded, I presume, that they didn't think it was well that the mayor and the council should know too much about what was going on in case it fell to it. Even today, you know, things are run by two people, you and me, in a deal.
Yeah.
If there's others on the outside, we let them in as we want them. You don't settle things by town meetings, even then nor now. I don't know if you agree with that or not, but that's the way I feel.
Yes, the committee only gets something done if the chairman does it.
Yes.
This is the way it needs to work out.
This was the arrangement. Russell Rogerson was the attorney for the city, for the utilities, and Robert Jackson was the attorney for the Niagara. And of course, as I say, the price had been agreed, and we had to go to the council and have the council pass a resolution authorizing this purchase, which the Niagara insisted on, see. So that was done on the afternoon of the deal. And the council, of course, approved it. First they'd ever heard of it. Then we went over to the, I think, Mr. Jackson's office.
Now, where was his office?
In his Hotel Jamestown. Same as Mr. Rogerson's office. It's in Hotel Jamestown. And they brought down a vice president of the Niagara Company, a fellow by the name of Collins. He was a great big gentleman. And the lawyer was a fellow by the name of Tutt. I'm remembering back a good many years.
Yes.
I'm sure of those names.
Yes.
And so we had to...
And you're men from Buffalo.
They were the men from the Buffalo, the Niagara. And Mr. Kelly was the president of the Niagara people. I'd known him, and I had dealings with him later on during the war. That's the second one. But then we had Well, the papers, I recall, were all set, and the agreement was made, and we had the resolution from the council, and the authority to go ahead with the deal, and I guess the money was set in escrow. Then I remember the question came up as to having the mayor's signature, which we got all right, but they wanted the city clerk to use the city seal, and the clerk himself, of course, to notarize it. Well, we couldn't find the city clerk. He was out for the evening. And whether they know how I got the seal or not, I knew where it was, and I went up the fire escape in the City Hall and got the seal, and brought it over to City Hall, to the lawyer's office, and of course they still didn't let anybody else authorize it or notarize it except the city clerk. So it went along toward the wee hours of the night. Some of the people had gone home, and of course Mr. Collins, how he ever got back to Buffalo that night, I'll never understand. Because the longer he stayed there, the thirstier he got. And of course, finally, we got the thing signed and sealed, and so Rogerson and I walked over to the Morning Post. We had two newspapers, the Jamestown Morning Post and the Jamestown Evening Journal.
And the Post is where the Elbert ski shop is now?
The Post is where the Post Journal is located now.
Oh, that was the Post building.
Yeah, and the Journal was across the old Sears Roebuck building on 2nd Street. That was the Jamestown Journal. The Jamestown Morning Post was where the newspaper was located now. My father built that building. And so Rogers and I walked over there that morning. It was coming daylight, and I got the first paper off the press, and I still have it someplace. And I thought, of course, that we had done something pretty wonderful. So I thought, that's fine. We hadn't gone to bed and hadn't gone home all night. So went up to City Hall, and of course when people started coming on the street and the paper was out, see, this had all been written up.
It was in the paper, this morning paper.
Oh, it was all written up with the idea, of course, it was to be released, because Mr. Rogerson was also attorney for the Morning Post. So we had it all set, as he did. So I remember coming out of the City Hall and coming down the street and thought people would be happy with what we'd done. The first bunch of people I met thought it was the most terrible thing that had ever been done. There was a lot of criticism, and I was quite surprised.
Why was that?
Well, I never could quite get what their thought was, that they always had an idea that the Niagara could do so much more for the city than the city could do for themselves, never realizing the fact, or appreciating the fact that the utilities had already done a lot for the city. They have continued to do a lot for the city. But anyway, that meant that we had taken over all of their accounts in the city of Jamestown, all of their accounts and distribution systems involved in it, and the villages saw it on, and a large part of the town of Ellicott. We did make the mistake, which I regretted later, that we didn't insist on having Lakewood too. As I can't recall just why we sort of threw that out the window. It would have been better if we had taken it, and it would have been better for the Niagara if we had taken it. But for some reason or other, Lakewood seemed to be a little bit remote, and we didn't think too much about it. In my opinion, it was a mistake that we made.
Well, Lakewood at that time, might I suggest, was, I think, probably a purely residential town, and Faulkner, of course, was pretty industrialized. I mean, you got it was they and Celeron were both maybe more financially better for you than Lakewood. Lakewood just would have been residential.
Of course, we had the water system in Celeron at the time. We didn't have it in Lakewood. Of course, a mistake was made years ago when Leonard Bergman and myself, we worked long and hard with some people to try to bring about an annexation of a lot of this area on the west side going up to Lakewood, which would have been quite a benefit to the whole community.
To the city, that's right.
Yeah, to the whole community, the whole area, because of the sewage situation in Lakewood, which is still bad, and of course their water business is not good, and we could have done a lot for them, and they could have done a lot for us. But of course, again, our good friend Mr. Jackson objected. He lived outside the city of Jamestown by about 2 doors on Fairmont Avenue, and of course he always felt he was in Jamestown, but until you treaded on his territory, and then of course he disagreed with us. But then there was a fellow by the name of Ziba Squire. His son still lives up there.
Squire.
He was quite an active gentleman around here many years ago, and
where?
In the whole area.
Oh, right.
Yeah, and of course he was against annexation, of course. But anyway, that's the story about how they got to Niagara.
Yes, well, you were very much involved.
But we got a good deal. And of course, we took over the distribution system. Then I gave us a chance to consolidate, pick up the business, and right away, of course, it meant enlarging the plant, which we were in the process of doing anyway. Because after we put in this 5,000 that I mentioned, of course, it wasn't long before we were in the market again for another generator. And of course, at that time, we bought a 6,000 kilowatt unit made by Brown Boveri, which is a Swiss company. We bought it from Switzerland. They brought a young man over here from Switzerland to assemble it, and he had the most crude-looking tools you ever set eyes on. And Carl Peterson, who owned the Crescent Tool Company, tried to give him our type of tools, but he couldn't see those. He wanted to work with his own. But that machine turned out to be a beautiful machine. It ran just like a sewing machine, and of course, like all machines, it wore itself out. Then, of course, it wasn't long before we were putting in larger units, like 15,000 kilowatts and on and on and on. Today they're up in between the 40 and 50,000 kilowatt bracket, all of which, of course, has happened in my lifetime.
Yes.
So when you stop and think that I have seen it go, of course, from oil lamps to electric lamps, the way we use them today. And as I have said many times in my wanderings around the country, and oftentimes I've been jumped down because of it, that there's coming a day when the electric utility business will have to be owned by the federal government, whether you like it or not. And I say that for the very reason that we're so dependent on the electric power today that if you turn off your lights or shut off your power, you're helpless. You've nothing. You don't know what to do. You're just stuck. Look at New York City with their blackouts. And you can imagine what would happen if we had a series of big blackouts in our big cities because of some, well, maybe labor. So, with the power companies today consolidating like they are, more and more and more, you're getting less and less operating groups. You're getting holding companies. So when it gets down to a point, then someone's going to come up with the idea that the day has arrived when the utilities, electric utilities, must be owned by the federal government because our life and welfare is too dependent on the electricity to let an outsider, which could be you or me or some individual with our whims, to decide something which wouldn't be the best interest of the people. Now, of course, I've made that statement in meetings, and of course have been taken to task for it because you just can't believe that it would ever come to pass. I won't see it, but there'll be a lot of people that will see it, I'm sure.
Well, now, just in a small scale, can I interject here that what's the difference between the large holding companies at the whim of individuals and the municipal power plant after 1931, which was just made up of a board of individuals running the power, you know?
Our plant?
Yes, yes.
Well, a municipal utility, they operate on a different theory. They do not have stockholders to pay right away. They do get certain concessions in taxes that they do not have to pay. It's the case, of course, of collecting from yourself to pay yourself. See? Now, whether there's an argument on that can be argued a long, long time.